What are we getting to do today? What do you got? What do you got for me? Come on. What do you got? Glazing? Glazing. All right, glaze medium. Glaze medium! Hey gang, welcome back. Today we're going to talk a little bit about glazing and washes. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to be using our Acryl Glaze and Wash Medium, which is basically an acrylic medium that allows you to turn all of the colors in your collection, no matter what brand they are, into amazing glazes and amazing washes. Give you a ton more utility out of the exact same paints you already own. What is a glaze? Start there. Glazing and washes are both what we call filters in the world of painting. And a filter is a method of applying one color of paint over a base coat of one or multiple other colors and allowing those to both be visible when you're done. So the paint you're applying as a glaze or as a wash must be less opaque in order to let those other colors underneath it show through. So typically you would add water to a paint to thin it down. And by thinning, you get that lowered opacity so that other things show through it. The problem is that as we add more water to an acrylic paint, the more it acts like water, and it starts to flow in inconsistent ways across the surface of the model as you're learning. And so until you really get it under control, it can be a tough way to learn about glazing. But glazing is it's a super useful technique. Something that allows us to control paint in a way that you can get very quick blends, very detailed blends on a model without ever really having to spend time on the palette blending colors. You can lay down a deep green, glaze a yellow over the top, and now you have a greenish yellow or a yellowish green, depending on how intense your glaze is, that looks like you mixed a lot more shades and tones of the colors than you really did. You just put two colors one over the other. Same with washes. Washes can be used as ways to shade your model to get better shadows on it, to alter the color of surfaces. There's a myriad of uses, all of which are quintessential in providing really great painted miniatures. Most painters across the world would tell you that they use glazes and or washes in some form or another at some point during the course of every model that they paint. I know we do. So we're going to get working on this guy today, a model that we had used in our pre-highlight video and our priming video. You can go back and watch those to see how we got here. We've got a layer of black primer on him with then a layer of dark neutral gray to give a deep kind of mid-tone shadow, and then white primer over the top of that to set up our light. So we have a more dynamic contrast on him, which is providing us with a fake light source, so to speak. Okay. So we're going to utilize that. I want to keep that white, gray, and black contrast that I have as I apply color on his fur cloak. We're going to paint his fur cloak today, and my idea here is that we're going to start with black brown. I'm going to show you how to make a glaze using our medium and the black brown paint to do a base coat that will allow the white, grays, and blacks to show through and look like we've used way more color at the straight out of the gates. Very quick way to paint. Then we're going to take some yellow ochre and some burnt sienna to give it a little bit more dynamic coloring, so it's not just a dark brown cloak, that it has some ruddy kind of earth tones in it to bring it alive. And I'll show you how you can do all of that very quickly. Okay, so let's start with the black brown. The first thing I want to do, set him off to the side, get myself a mixing cup here. I use these little graduated cups. They're fantastic. You can buy them on Amazon all over the world, a billion of them for nothing. So we take the black brown paint, give it a good shake, pop that open real quick, and we want to add just a little bit of paint. It's not a huge area that we're doing. If you were doing an entire army, obviously you would add more. I'm going to put about 4 or 5 drops of paint in the cup. I don't need a whole lot. I'm going to take our medium, give it a good shake as well. Stop there. I like to start with about 4 times as much. So if I put in, 4 or 5 drops of paint, then I'm looking at probably 20 drops of medium in order to get a good, consistent reduction of opacity. In this case, I'm just going to use the highly scientific method of squeeze the bottle until I think I've got enough. Okay, so that looks about right. A lot more medium than we had paint is the goal. Grab a big mixing brush, or a Pro Synthetic 6s that has seen better days. I get a little bit of water on it. I want the brush damp as I mix, but it doesn't. It just adds a little bit of flow on the brush so that you're not caking it too much. Right? That mixed up. The medium does not alter the color of the paint at all. It doesn't lighten it, doesn't darken it. It is a colorless medium, so you don't have to worry about it tinting. It doesn't anything. The color you put in is the color you get out. Just make sure you mix that up real well. Off of there. And now you'll be able to see that very quickly we have a much reduced paint. All of our Pro Acryl paints are very opaque out of the bottle. You can see now with the addition of the medium, you can see all of the line work on my tattoo through the paint itself. Brush a quick rinse over here. And let's get going. I'm going to want to grab a pretty big brush, so I'll use another one of our Pro Synthetic 6s. This one is from our Sam Lin's Weapon Rack set with the matte black handles. I'm going to take some of this, I'll set it over here so you can see there's no tricks. We're just going to put the brush into paint. Then come over here and start painting with it. Because the glazing medium does not thin the viscosity of the paint, it still acts exactly like you would expect a paint to work straight out of the bottle. Feels exactly the same. So until you add any more water to it or other thinners, it's going to feel like paint is supposed to feel. So now I can paint it on here directly without it skating around, feeling uncontrollable. It just goes on like a base coat should. Difference being that it is going to be much more translucent and let us keep that bright white and gray we have from our pre-highlight. There we have a very quick brown cloak. Noticing that we contain the black from our original prime job. The gray gives us this mid-tone brown through here. And then, of course, our white gives us this brighter brown. All of those achieved just by the interaction that the pre-highlight has with the color that we're using here. I went ahead and got the skulls because brown. So, works well. So that's a good starting point for us. While that sets up for a bit, I'm going to come over here, clean my brush off. You might have noticed in the sped up video, I would occasionally, every couple of times that I'm going back to the model, go ahead and get a little bit of water on your brush. I always just clean my brush in my water cup. I don't squeegee it on the side. I just come out with however much water this brush will hold. This is number 6, so it holds an absolute ton of water in it. And then give it a quick wipe on the paper towel. Then go over into the product. I'm not adding too much water in, so I'm not constantly thinning, but I keep the brush wet that way, and I also keep a nice flow as I go back onto the model. All right, and there you have it. We've got the brown layer of glaze on, and that was very, very quick. We let it dry. You can tell it has a very nice matte finish, just like our paint, so the Glaze Wash Medium doesn't add any sheen, satin, or gloss or otherwise to your paint. It allows you to take a paint and thin it way down in opacity as far as you want to go, maintain that matte finish. which can be crucial as you're doing spot glazing for skin, for lots of other smaller details on small models. Just a fantastic way to do that. Dries pretty quick. It does take a little bit longer for your paint to dry once you've done it as a glaze with our medium than normal, but only about 5 or 10 minutes longer. Okay, so we've got a nice highlight on the top of the cloak there. All that is the same white pre-highlight showing through the brown. Then as we fall into the shadows, we get that nice deep black-brown paint that is, pretty much the color straight out of the bottle as it's in the shadows there, versus the way it looks when we go over the white pre-highlight. So again, showing the power of pre-highlighting, being able to make a very quick glaze even for your base layer, gives you a lot more contrast with that base layer and gets you off to a really good start. Now, I also, in the short break there, as it dried, I went ahead and mixed up the exact same way some yellow ochre. So this is simply our normal yellow ochre paint done with the Glaze and Wash Medium. No other colors have been added here. And we are going to apply that into the highlight areas to start giving ourselves some color. So now we're going to start utilizing the pre-highlight that we have as a way to guide us where our next state of glaze goes. Because we're just going to be put it where that brighter section is. On top of the brighter hairs out here, you can see here as it shelves off, down here a little bit, but not really in the shadows much. We might do a little bit of very thin in the shadows to make sure that it looks like you didn't spill paint. It looks like the color of the hair, but not near as much in the darkness. So for this, as a second layer, because now we're going to be covering up more and more of our pre-highlight, I am going to leave more water on my brush. So now I go over here, rinse my brush real quick. I'm not going to hit the paper towel with it at all. I'm going to come over here and just put that directly into the glaze. Now, a lot of times I will use what we call my thumb palette, and I will wipe off a bunch of that material onto my thumb, right? Reason being, I don't want to flood the model now that my brush is loaded with quite a bit of water as well. I've got this nice, you can see how thin down that paint is, but it still moves a lot like paint, right? I can layer it up, and I'm still going to see a lot of that black-brown through it. But I don't want to go and touch the model with all of this paint. It'll become a big puddle on here, right? So wipe a bunch of that off. Then we're going to come up here and we're going to start looking at these highlight areas, and we're just going to kind of dab and pull the brush along. I want it to get down inside of some of the hair texture here. Watch how it interacts with that brown that's already there. I'm not going for complete coats here. Right? I'm just going through and dabbing it in wherever it goes. That's fine for now. You can come back and touch it up. Again, glazing gives you a really neat interaction with that base layer. Here, get a little bit more. And selectively put it on those batches of hair that are lighter colored from our pre-highlight. Punch back here. On it. As paint I starts to leave the brush, I don't have as much now. I will go ahead and come down into the shadows a bit with this color. Not going to leave as much paint there. Again, just trying to avoid the look that the yellow sits up here and for some reason not down here. Area pops back out and had some brightness to it. So down here. Just kind of hitting the tops of some of these tufts of hair on the fur as we go. A lot quicker. Just smacking paint around. Notice I start thinning less and less as I get my coverage. I just kind of want to go back and get a spurt of paint some of those areas. Really focusing on it up where my brightness should be. Again, the glaze doing its job of letting the brown and the yellow work together to give us our final color. Seeing this blend happen here. working like a champ. Taking quick swipes at the model. Pick up the tops of the hair. I don't want to shove a lot of yellow down into the shadows over on the dark side of the cloak. I'm not as concerned over here, because we're going to have much more of this color be apparent light. I don't care about the skulls right now. I'm not being very specific about avoiding them. That's fine. Pretty good. Very, very quick. Doesn't leave you the texture of dry brushing, but still gives you the idea of picking up just the highlights on the top of the fur. Most of this time I'm just using the side of the brush and skating it across. Make sure I even that out by placing a little bit more color up top. Okay, so now we're dry. We've got the yellow ochre glaze is set in there. You can see we're still very matte finish. We can see that all of the glaze that pooled down into the hair has evened out. Looks really good. Kept with our scaling of brightness and darkness for all that contrast we had originally anyway. Adds a little bit of warmth to the otherwise kind of dreary brown fur. I'm really liking the way that looks. And next we're going to move on to a wash. I want to do a wash of burnt sienna, which is a very deep orange that will give us some shading, but it will also then bring the yellow and the brown together into one kind of cohesive pelt color, utilizing a lot of that orange in there, which I think will be a good bridge between the gap on the yellow and the brown. Obviously, you can do this with any colors. You can skip this step. But I want to show you how to make a wash out of the Glaze Wash Medium so that you can take your glazing down the road a little bit further. The first thing I always do, which is not a filtering step per se, like a glaze or a wash, is a dry brush step. And typically before I apply any type of wash, whether it's a flesh wash or a shade wash like this, or a filter wash that's just meant to change the color of a model, I like to do a little bit of highlighting. Now, it's not always going to be dry brushing. I might use a brush to do my highlights, but on something like this fur, a quick dry brush is going to do great to bring out the edges of those clumps of hair, so that when we put the wash on, all of those edge highlights wind up being picked up with the new color of burnt sienna. And then it makes it very easy as we go back with our brush to just do little spot highlights, but we'll have all that texture in there. So I highly recommend doing all of your edge highlighting at least to a minimum level prior to applying your wash as a filter, because the wash is just going to go over the entirety of the fur. We're not going to put it in specific places. We're just going to wash. And so having those highlights there first, it makes sure that all of the edges of the areas that want to be peeked out also get colored by that. So I've already got some pale yellow. It's just a very bright, almost like a fake white for what we're doing here. I've got my DD1 Pro Synthetic Dry Brush. It's just a domed, small dry brush. Get a little bit of that. I will just wipe it off on a paper towel. Not much color on this at all. And then we're just going to treat the dry brush strokes as if they are the ray of light from our light source. So we want to make sure we only dry brush in one direction. Okay, so I'm only applying paint in a downward stroke, sideways stroke across this surface, never upwards, because that'll reduce our shadow from that direction. Okay, so again, I want to change and I want to come across the hairs this way. That's the way the light's hitting him. Kind of light pressure there, and then fall off to nothing as we go into our shadow. Now that's pick up all of those clumps of hair really nicely. Pound of paint on the brush, waste it all on the paper towel. Back over here. Again, only on the downward stroke. Very, very light, so I'm not jamming a lot of bright paint into areas I don't want to brighten up too much. Kind of treating this top dead center piece as my brush strokes will come out and downward from there, depending on which side I'm going to. Or down here where those tufts beneath the shadows, and then just kind of lightly feather it over into the dark side. Not too much over there. It's really that simple. It's just a really good way to make sure that you've got enough highlight so that when we do the wash, it'll pick up all of those edges. Like I said, you could just stop there. You've got a really nice looking pelt that was 2 layers of glaze and a dry brush. Awesome. I really want this guy to have kind of a ruddy, rusty brown kind of coloration to him and a lot of his stuff. I don't feel like this guy keeps his stuff very clean. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's do this and show you the magic of the wash medium in action. So again, another mixing cup. We're going to take the burnt sienna. We don't need a whole lot of this, so again, probably 4 drops is fine. Our highly scientific glaze wash measuring step, which is to just squeeze a bunch in there. We're going to now mix that up. Mixing brush, preferably not my painting brush. Mix it till you can't see the medium on its own anymore. Really simple. Now this is going to, just like our glazes, this is going to give us a much less opaque version of the paint. And I can see all of my tattoo through it. That's a good gauge. But it is going to flow like paint. You can see as I turn the cup, right, it doesn't come running out of there. It's going to take its own sweet time, just like acrylic paint should. So in order to now make that flow more like a wash, we're going to add a squirt of water. About like that. Right? So not quite doubling the material, but close. Right? So we added the medium, which holds the pigment together as we thin it, so that we get a very even dispersal of color. And then the water makes it flow more like we expect a wash to. Now you can see as I tap the brush up on the side of the cup, what I'm looking for is that. I'm looking for a nice tail of paint that leaves pigment behind it, but flows down quickly. Now, if you do this and you touch and it doesn't leave very much pigment behind, then you probably want to add a little more paint. Okay. That's pretty perfect for what we're trying to do here. This will allow it to pile up in the low areas, the deep recesses like you expect a wash to. Now, this isn't going to necessarily be a complete shade. It's not as dark as the black brown that we put on there. That's not what we're looking for. We just want it to be a nice filter that colors all of this and picks up still the darkness and the shadow of that dark brown. Okay? We get a little bit of water here, and just like any wash, we're just going to load our brush up, and instead now, where I took the glaze off on my thumb over here, we're not going to do that with a wash. The wash, we're just going to load our brush up, and we're just going to go to town. Don't be shy with it. Put it over everything. Get too big of a lake of color, might want to mop it up and move it along. Like I said before, the Glaze Wash Medium keeps the paint active longer, so you have more time to move it around without tearing it. I'm going to get this everywhere. Shadows, highlights, the whole 9. Again, because we're painting in layers that are very, very translucent, we don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to, alter that base layer too much. We know it's going to change the coloring, but it's going to inherit all of the highlight and shadow values. How dark is it? Well, it's going to continue to be dark. We're going to brighten it up a little bit because we're using a brighter color, but it's still going to maintain a balance that works. Notice I'm not adding any more water to my brush, really, unless it starts feeling gummed up, like the paint's not flowing off of it, which using a wash that's super wet, so that shouldn't happen. Should just be able to go back and forth to the wash cup here and back and smack it over the model. You'll just get it everywhere. Want to make sure you don't leave any big areas where you've got a color that doesn't have any of this on it, because since we're changing the color with an orangish, might make it look a little. Hunt around, make sure it everywhere, close to everywhere as possible. We can always come back with more of this wash if after it dries we have areas that we want to see coloring to. Again, if you've got a pool like this that you feel like that's going to be too much color, just swipe it with the brush off. I can siphon that out of there. Workable for quite a while. Do that as much as you like. Still see that nice yellow. Got those edge highlights that we did from the quick dry brush still popping through there, which is great. That. We'll come back in just a second when all of this is dried to take a look at the final product. All right, gang, there we go. It's all dried. We've got our highlights still showing through with that nice, rich, rusty color embedded into the hair now. We still maintain the darkness that we had. All of this from our pre-highlight. We haven't had to do any thinking. All of this brightness and darkness like you see on his skin set up the goal here, and all we had to do was make sure we use the glaze medium to keep all of our paints in that less opaque state, so that we continue to show that white, gray, and black through all of these colors, right? So while it does desaturate them, we don't have the vibrancy of each individual color per se. We get a very good way to show like a dirty fur cloak. Now, last thing we want to do is follow up with a little bit of a dry brush just on the highlight spots again to pull those hairs back out. We have a really good look of that first dry brush pass, keeping those highlights good. Now we want to just grab those again, and I want to show you one last thing that's really, really cool about the Glaze Wash Medium, and that's that we can use it to mix. Unlike other washes that you may have used in the past, once you put a filter over a model, sometimes it's hard to figure out how to highlight that model now because you've put a wash over it, whether it's a flesh wash or a black wash or a brown or whatever. You put a wash over your colors, it shades it, it makes it look really good. We get this really neat rusty coloring, but now none of the colors are what we've painted on there. They're all mixes of all three colors. We've used the black brown, the yellow ochre, and the burnt sienna. So now none of these colors exist independently any longer. They've all been blended visually by putting them one over the other. So now how do you go back and highlight? We used the pale yellow as the dry brush the first time, and it looked good over the top of the yellow ochre. Is it going to look as good if we put it over the top of the yellow ochre that is now blended visually with the burnt sienna? We have a little bit more orange, so maybe the bright, pale nature of this yellow might not work as well with the color of the two blended together. So what we can do, unlike other washes, we have our burnt sienna wash, and we just take it and we blend it a little bit out here. Much as we need. We can create now a pale yellow that has a little bit of that orange to it, and will now guaranteed fit in with the color we've got on the model. The wash medium doesn't alter the paint's characteristics so much that it no longer acts like a paint when you need it to. So we do something like this, come back with same dry brush, load that up with this new color that is our wash blended, right? We can see it's a little bit darker there. Now we come back and do the exact same thing we did before. Grab those hairs ever so lightly. Not going to go as far down with my highlights this time as we did before. I'm just going to kind of stick around the top area here. We can see how now that color doesn't have such a huge impact, even when I do kind of drag it down into the shadows, because it has enough of that burnt sienna in it that it just works. Being able to have your wash do, I mean, really triple duty, quadruple duty. You don't have to be done with it after you slap it on the model. You can continue to use it to highlight, get the right coloring that you need. Use your imagination and go wild with it. All right. Now we've grabbed those hairs again. Dry brush a quick scrub. We have a nice fur cloak. Lots and lots of contrast. We can see the tufts of hair as the sculpt was intended to show us. We've got good coloration, everything from that really nice deep brown that we did with the black brown, boom, to the yellow highlighted areas where it's a little bit warmer in the sunlight with the yellow ochre. And then last but not least, that unifying color that brings it together into what the color of the animal's pelt would have been, which would have been kind of that rusty orange brown that we did with the burnt sienna. There you go. A great, quick, simple way to use the Glaze Wash Medium to create less opaque colors that you can do just about any type of filtering you want to with. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the chat below, and we look forward to seeing you back here for the next one. Really liking this guy so far. Later, gang.